Okay, let's go. So, hello everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar on the coming federal elections in Germany that will occur on Sunday. I am Julien Zalk, in charge of the Eurobarometer at Verian. I also co-direct the Centre Verian sur le futur de l'Europe. And before we start, a few housekeeping points about the organization of this webinar. First, this session is being recorded, and this recording will be sent to you later in case you weren't able to follow the whole thing, or if you'd like to forward it to your contacts. Second, we have also set aside a moment at the end of the presentation for any questions you may have. So please use the Q&A function on Zoom. Questions you write down will be seen by the presenters. Before entering into the core of the topic, I would like to present briefly the Centre Verian sur le futur de l'Europe and the Eurobarometer. So what is the Centre Verian sur le futur de l'Europe? We are a team of European researchers from various national Verian teams with a strong expertise in international surveys, and particularly in public and political opinion polling. We have a strong focus, especially on the Eurobarometer and on EU countries. So the Centre Verian is, in a way, some kind of think tank within Verian, an opportunity for us as researchers to take a step back and reflect about our data. And in this presentation, we will use quite a few statistics from the Eurobarometer, which is a survey tool of the EU institutions, and most probably the most important opinion survey in the world. The standard Eurobarometer exists since 1974. It is conducted face-to-face in the respondents' home among the general public age 15+. It covers the EU member states and beyond. Verian is in charge of the Eurobarometer standard for more than 2 decades now. And now moving to the core topic of this webinar. This slide shows some important steps between the last federal election in September 2021 and those that will occur on Sunday. In September 21, the SPD came first, and after several weeks of discussion, a coalition emerged between the SPD, the Greens, and the Liberals of the FDP. The coalition called the Traffic Light Coalition, with the different colors of the different parties. Olaf Scholz, Chancellor candidate of the SPD, was appointed Chancellor in December 21. This coalition of 3 parties was characterized by problems finding common grounds on many topics. At the end of 2024, the disclosure of a document called D-Day Scenarios and Measures showed that the liberals of the FDP were planning a detailed media strategy for undermining Olaf Scholz's coalition. As a consequence, Scholz fired his then finance minister, FDP leader Christian Lindner, and then lost a confidence vote in the Bundestag on 16 December. And a snap election was organized on February 23, so next Sunday. We wanted to organize this webinar because these German federal elections are extremely important for Germany, of course, but also for the EU, and ultimately for the overall balance between the EU and other global players. Indeed, they will be organized in a political context marked nationally by the recent very high scores of the AfD in the Länder elections of Saxony and Brandenburg, and even a first place in Thuringia. Internationally, the election of Donald Trump and the influence of Elon Musk, who has openly supported the AfD, can also play a role in these elections. During this webinar, Nicolas Bécuve, in charge of political and electoral surveys at Verian will give us an overview of public opinion in Germany based on the results of recent Eurobarometer surveys. He will describe the perception of the EU, particularly in relation to that of national political institutions in Germany, and will also describe the issues that Germans consider to be priorities. He will then hand over to Roland Abold, Managing Director at Infratest DIMAP in Germany, who will give us the latest poll results in Germany and tell us what we can expect on Sunday after the election and also in the weeks following the results. Nico, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Julien, and nice to see you all today. So indeed, I'm going to start presenting our analysis of German public opinion ahead of this election. We have used, as Julien said, the Eurobarometer survey, which is a golden mine gold of public opinion. It's a gold mine because we are able to analyze the perception of German public opinion compared to other countries. It also helps us to reflect the trend over time and to compare what was the context in the previous election to what it is now. And we will see that the context has drastically changed, and we also see that in the current race for the German election. So first, we wanted to concentrate on the trust in the EU. And reminder that Germany is one of the founding members of the European Union, is also the country that has the biggest weight in the EU. But at the same time, trust is rather low if you compare it with other countries. So at the moment, we have the Germans are quite divided in their trust in the EU, with 49% say they trust. There is only a slight increase of trust compared to 2021, but it remains quite low if you compare it with other countries, while at the moment, we have a record of trust in the EU overall. So Germany has a kind of quite divided on EU questions. And at the same time, when you see, we see a decrease of positive image of the EU by 8 points in Germany. So results are a bit divided on this question. Then, if you look at the overall trend for the national government and the trust in the national government and trust in the Commission, you see very interesting trends. So we see that, so you see on the slide, trust in the national government was fairly high in Germany across the years, above the EU average. So the trust in national governments in other countries, and since the election, since the election in 2021, it has decreased to a dramatic low score of only 34% of trust in the national government in Germany, which is exactly the same level as the EU average. So Germany, who used to be a country where the government was highly trusted, higher than in other countries in Europe, is now at the average, at the same level, and it's quite a low level of trust, which also is was a sign of the new election that had to happen. And in parallel, trust in the European Commission, which was, as you see, higher in Germany over the years, since the COVID crisis and the inflation crisis, became lower than EU average and is now at a 45% trust in the European Commission in Germany, while it's at 51% in the EU. And if you see historically, trust in the European Commission was higher in Germany than EU average. So a change of context. But also a question that divides the German population. We see that politically, there is a strong division with people on the left trust a large majority trusting the EU, people in the center divided, and people on the right distrusting majoritarily the EU. We also see a geographical divide, and that's also appeared when we look at the results of elections at a Länder level. East Germany show a very low trust in the EU, to only 27%, compared to West Germany, 54%. We'll come back to this divide, but this is something that structures the German public opinion. Also, an urbanization divide, and we talked a lot in different elections about the divide between rural and cities, and we see that in rural areas, we only have 37% of trust. Socioeconomic divide with people who are more well off, who don't have any problem to pay their bills, being in majority trusting the EU, while people who most often and struggle, only 32% trust the EU. And finally, maybe lower, but still an age divide with the youngest population in Germany being trusting the EU, while the others less likely to trust. So we see that this question divide the German public opinion. But what is interesting is that these divisions have increased since the last federal elections. The last federal election were only 3 years ago, but we see that the polarization has increased actually in 3 years. In East Germany, trust in the EU has decreased by 12%, while in West Germany, it has increased by 4 points. Similarly, we look at the subjective urbanization. In rural areas, it has decreased by 5 points. It has increased in small and mid-sized towns. And finally, looking at the difficulties in paying bills, this has, trust has decreased among the ones that have often problems to pay their bills, and it has increased in people who almost never. So we see that this division, this polarization has increased, and that can create, strong effects on an election and on German public opinion. But despite this trust, though, we see that it's quite mitigated. It's not very clear cut. German population is divided on trust in the EU, but would they want to leave ever the EU? And these slides will show a kind of a different picture. So they are quite critical towards the institutions, but you see that they strongly recognize the benefits from being a member of the EU. So we see on this slide from the post-electoral survey of the European Parliament that a large majority of Germans believe that they have benefited from the EU, 69%. And you see the trend line is different from what we see on the trust in the EU. It has slightly declined, but it's very high and quite stable over the years. To tone down that a little bit, we see on the pie chart that in East Germany, the benefits are lower than in West Germany, but still a majority in East Germany believe that they have benefited from being part of the EU. And when you ask the hard question, would Germany could better face the future outside the EU, we see that a large majority disagree with that. Nearly half of the population say they totally disagree with that. So this is a sign that even if they are critical towards the EU institution, they don't want to leave the EU. And if you look politically, even people on the right, so people who are really on the right of the spectrum, which is, we will see a small share of the population, really people who are really saying they're on the right, only 34% say they will face, they would face the future better outside the EU. So we see there is a strong recognition that despite they are being critical about the institutions, probably due to the COVID crisis, how it was handled, and the inflation crisis, a majority believe that the future is in the EU, and it's unlikely that Brexit happens, despite that AfD, a strong Eurosceptic party, is quite high in the polls. And then we'll move to the national concerns and the polarizing issues. So on these slides, we analyze what were the most important issues facing Germany at the moment. Probably not a surprise for everyone to see immigration first, with 35%, and an increase of 23 points compared to the last German election. But what is striking is the reverse of trends compared to the last federal election that happened only 3 years ago. Environment was the first time, and we see that there is a complete inversion between environment and immigration, changing completely the context. And that would definitely, certainly have an impact on the results of this election. Immigration, remember, was also the first issue of the last European elections for the German public opinion, the German voters. And it was the only country in Europe saying that immigration was the first issue. So it's a very important issue in Germany, striking, more important than in other countries in Europe. And we see that in 3 years, this has dramatically changed. But it's not only about immigration, huh? It's also about economy. Rising prices have strongly increased as an issue, 31%, and economic situation has increased by 4%. So we see this combination of immigration being much more important than 3 years ago, and rising prices and socioeconomic issue being the driver of this campaign. And a complete different situation than in 2021, where environment was playing a big role and also led to a different outcome. And then we were interested to understand what politically it meant. And so we, here on this slide, we split the question between people who vote on who say they are politically on the left. So we see 25% of the German sample. People who say they are in the center, so center right, center left, around 50% of the German sample, and people who are on the right, 20% of the German sample. Interesting that it reflects the score, the current score in the polls of the AfD. We wanted to analyze this because we wanted to understand whether there were differences politically. And first thing is that there are differences. We see that environment, climate change is the first issue for Germans who say they're on the left, whereas this issue doesn't come across for the other groups, center and the right. So we see very different issues. That's being said, immigration is everywhere, and it has even progressed quite a lot among the people who are on the left. So an increase of 16 points compared to the last election, 21%. Last election, 3 years ago, it was nearly inexistent for people who vote on the left. And you move to the center, we see also a huge increase, with immigration being just the second issue after rising prices, with an increase of 24 points. And then you move to the right of the spectrum, and then we see more than half of the German on the right saying immigration being an issue. So a strong concern, a concern that affects also people on the left, but differently, and we see that there are different issues. Another thing I wanted to mention is the international situation. It's a new item that wasn't tested 3 years ago. What is very telling is that it's an item for the people on the left, an item for people on the right, but people in the center, with the majority of the people in Germany, they don't mention the international situation as a key concern. And I think this is very important because of the current situation, the Conference of Munich, the current situation, the war in Ukraine. And that's something maybe that Roland will tell us about, you know, why international issues are not actually so present in Germans' mind. And that I think is a very important sign, because people are really focused on their national issues while there is a huge international crisis. We wanted to focus on migration to show how polarizing this issue was, and also it increased over the years. We see now that 60% of Germans have a negative opinion of people who are from outside the EU. It has increased by 17 points since 2021. So is a major change in only 3 years. And we saw that the migration issue also increased, but we see that the negative perception also increased. And if we look on the right, we see that this is very polarizing, because people who say they are politically on the right, 83% of them have a negative opinion of people from outside the EU. Also, people living in East Germany, 77%. We know that in East Germany, AfD had a quite high score in the last Länder elections and European elections, and people living in rural areas, and to lesser extent other people. But we see that it's very present. So the negative opinion of migrants from outside the EU, but it's also much higher among people on the right or people living in East Germany. And finally, because it's not only about immigration, it's also about the economy, climate. This slide is very telling about the changes in Germany over time. We went from a situation in May 2016, less than 10 years ago, where nearly everyone in Germany said the economic situation of Germany was good, and it declined by 50 points in 8 years, being now at 34% of people in Germany saying the situation is good. it correlates interestingly with the appreciation of the government. The trust in the government, as we saw earlier, is 33%. So there is already, you know, negative perception now of the economy, and we saw that it has even more declined during the last 3 years during the Scholz the Olaf Scholz government. But we see that this situation has dramatically decreased. And also, if you compare with other EU countries, that's very important. In July 2021, Germany was the 5th country with the 5th perception of how good the economy was among the top countries, the driver. And now it's at the position 16 only, with 34%. So a big change, a sentiment of decline, at least relative decline compared to other countries, for a country which is driving the EU. So now I leave the floor to Roland to talk about more in details about the campaign. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nico, and welcome to everyone from my side. I will show you some of our latest findings from our national polls. I'm heading up Infratest DIMAP, which is one of the long-standing German polling institutes. We are doing polling since more than 25 years in Germany, and are basically working for one of the German public broadcasters and actually providing them with all the data, numbers, and surveys around election and the political climate. So just a few notes on our electoral system and on the political system so that everyone is on the same page about what we are talking here. Then some main trends which actually fit very well to what Nico has just showed from the Eurobarometer, and then looking at the latest polls, what will come, what we are thinking that we are going to see at the coming election on Sunday. So important to know, Germany has a personalized proportional electoral system. So this is the paper ballot on the right side here. So everyone has 2 votes, one for the candidate in the respective constituency, and the second vote for the party list. To go a little bit more into detail, because there has also been a new electoral law installed, which is for the first time now utilized in the upcoming elections. So in the past, we had a quite huge parliament in Germany with currently more than 730 seats. And that, there was a consensus that this needs to be changed. And now the new electoral law will bring us a fixed number of 630 seats. And the distribution is according to the proportional representation based on the second vote. So the second vote is the most important vote, which is then giving or is actually defining the majorities in the parliament. What has there been in the past is this overhang and compensatory mandates, which actually made the Bundestag very large. This has all been abolished, so that will not going to happen, and this is why we have now a fixed number of 630 seats. But this also brings the consequence that a candidate who is winning the majority of the first vote, the Erststimme in the constituency, has no guarantee to enter in the Bundestag. So everyone who wants to enter the Bundestag has to have a majority backed from the secondary vote. And the last thing which hasn't changed is that there is a 5% threshold, so only parties gaining more than 5% of the second votes can enter the Bundestag. The only exception is if a party wins 3 or more constituencies, then this party still passes this threshold, even if it's below 5%. We have heard about the traffic light coalition. So Germany is the land of the coalitions. We have lots of coalitions on national, but also on the federal state level. And until the collapse in November 2024, this traffic light coalition was the first real three-party coalition on a national level. So it was kind of a premiere, therefore, yeah, it's quite important how that actually went and how it didn't work out in the end. And this is also something which will later be interesting when we see what potential coalitions could come after this election now. Overall, Germany has a lot of different coalition models. You can see that on the right side. These are the different federal states, the Bundesländer, and we have 16 states with 11 different government coalitions. We have single-party governments, we have two-party coalitions, and we have also different types of three-party coalitions. So there are a lot of options which are possible, and some of them will also be interesting then later when looking at the potential results for the upcoming election and what is to be expected happening after the election. So the overall situation as described by Nico, it's an election in times of crisis. There is actually a lot of discussion around migration, and there is a lot of discussion around the economic situation of Germany. And that combined with the fact that the Traffic Light Coalition has had a lot of trouble in finding decisions, in working together, we actually saw a dramatic decline in satisfaction with the German government. So here we are asking, how satisfied are you with the work of the federal government? And that was coming from quite okayish numbers at the beginning of 2022, and then going down dramatically until the final collapse of this government. At the end, 85% were not satisfied with that government, which is a record low number for all kind of governments in Germany, and therefore it's showcasing that the situation is really seen dramatically also by the voters in Germany. And the other thing, which is a more general thing, we are also asking on how the practice of democracy is perceived by the German people. And here we also see that actually for a longer time, the satisfaction was quite high over 2012, 2015, 2018, even beginning of 2020, 2021. And then it dramatically dropped until 2022, 23, and 24, which is showcasing that people were actually not satisfied on what the political system is actually providing to them. It's not that the Germans are against democracy by itself. When we ask, do you like democracy as a political system? We have a high majority, of course, who is supporting that. But actually, the outcomes and the practice of democracy is seen very critical at the moment. That whole situation is now where this election takes place. And when we look at our latest poll, we are always doing the latest poll 10 days before the election. So this is from February 13th, from last week, where we actually see something which hasn't dramatically changed in the past couple of weeks. The CDU-CSU is by far the strongest party currently, with around or a little bit more than 30%. The AfD, so the right-wing populist party, is currently coming to 21% in our latest poll. And then we see the current or the previous parties who were forming the Traffic Light Coalition, the SPD, the Greens, and the FDP. They are all with lower numbers than before. So in the the column at the bottom, you see actually the election results from 2021. So the SPD is currently at 14%. The Greens also at 14%, not so much changed compared to 2021. And then the Liberals, the FDP, with 4%, dramatically lower than in the last election. And then we have two more leftish parties, the Linke, so the left party, currently with 6%, and the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, which is actually a separated party, which was previously part of the left party, is at 4.5%. So we actually have three parties where it's not sure if they will make the 5% threshold, and this has, of course, a lot of consequences then what kind of governments are possible after this election. Here, as it says on the slide, it's not a prognosis, it's a poll. It's showing the current political situation 10 days before the election, and therefore giving us some hints on what to be expected. Just a look at the more long-term trends over the past month. As you could see on the right side, there hasn't been any dramatic movements. The shares of the parties remain pretty stable. And when you compare that to what you can see on the left side of that slide, that was before the last Bundestag election in 2021, you see that especially for the Social Democrats, there have been significant gains over the electoral campaign, and the CDU-CSU has lost, and also the Green Party has lost in the polls. This is not happening this time. Actually, over the main course of the electoral campaign, the numbers remained pretty stable, which is not the normal case in Germany. Normally, you see some parties gaining momentum and winning and losing. This time, it's a rather stable political environment here. An explanation for that, or one explanation for that, is that we have a situation which we have never had before. All the candidates of the most important parties actually have very low popularity or satisfaction levels in the German public. You see the Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, with 23%. That is also a record low number for an actual Chancellor. You have Robert Habeck from the Green Party, the Minister of Economy, with 27, which is pretty low also compared to his previous numbers in 2021 and so on. You see Christian Lindner, Nico mentioned that, the fired Minister for Finance with 23%. You have the opposition leader, Friedrich Merz from the CDU. He has 32%, a little bit better, but also not a very good number. And last but not least, you have Alice Weidel from the AfD. She also is in the 20s, and as you can see, that also hasn't changed significantly over time. So that is also a special situation, indifferent to many other European countries, where leaders of populist parties actually have very high popularity numbers. That is also not the case for Alice Weidel. So, of course, if we would look at the supporters of each party, the satisfaction levels would be quite high for the own candidate, but all of these candidates actually fail in attracting potential voters from the other side of the political spectrum, and therefore there is no one who can really gain that momentum and really drive a change also in the numbers what we have seen before. In terms of the next government, who should lead the next government? It's a little bit the same as we see for the polls. So a bit more than 30% say the CDU-CSU should lead the government, and then to a lesser extent the SPD, and the Greens, also the AfD only with 11%, and then the smaller parties are of course not so much in the relevant set for leading the government. So actually people believe and also think that the CDU-CSU will win that election to a certain extent and be also then the party who needs to find a coalition, and Friedrich Merz will be then potentially the next chancellor if all happens as the polls suggest it. But in terms of what is happening after the election, the coalition question is of course a very important thing. As we have seen, Germany is the land of the coalition. So it all depends a little bit on how many of the smaller parties are actually making the 5% threshold. So we can think in scenarios here based on what the polls are saying. So if we assume that the polls are correct and they transform more or less directly into the later election result, this is now the scenario if only one of the three smaller parties will make it into the government, in this case, the left party, Die Linke. Then a two-party coalition is possible, and then it's most likely that it could come to a grand coalition between CDU-CSU and SPD, the Social Democrats, because this has been a government model which we have seen a lot also in the past, and as people are really looking forward to have a stable government, this could be something where we will be looking at after the election. Also possible is a government between CDU-CSU and the Greens. There we have actually the migration question, where these two parties are really positioning themselves a bit on the opposite side. So this will be hard to negotiate, but still possible. And then, of course, mathematically, the most obvious choice would be a coalition between CDU-CSU and the AfD, but that is pretty unlikely because all other parties have actually made clear that they will not work together with AfD after the election, and Friedrich Merz has made it explicitly clear that he will not form a coalition with AfD after the election, so that is pretty much unlikely. So to sum up here, if either none of the three small parties or only one is making it into the parliament, then we will potentially have a two-party coalition afterwards. If two parties, in this scenario, the left party and the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, BSW, will make it into the parliament, then a two-party coalition could be unlikely. So if these numbers transform into the later election result, no one actually will have or no two-party coalition will have a majority then in the Bundestag, and then we will face the discussions around three-party coalitions. For example, that one that is mentioned here, CDU-CSU plus the Social Democrats plus the Green Party, called INIA coalition. Yeah, we will need to see if that is then a potential outcome. But as said, if two smaller parties make it into the parliament, then that is potentially the only choice to form a government. And if all three of the smaller parties make it to the government, of course, we will not have a two-party coalition with a majority, and then all the other potential three-party coalition models need to be discussed. So to sum it up, as we have seen both in the Eurobarometer survey numbers, but also in the numbers here from Infratest DIMAP, this election is an election in times of crisis. It's a very stable political climate at the moment, with a high dissatisfaction with the government, with the economy, with the migration policy, and so on. So and also different to previous elections, there is no single candidate with high popularity numbers who could actually take that up a bit and bring a momentum to a certain party. As things stand today, the CDU-CSU is very likely to become the strongest party and will then be in charge of finding a majority to form a government. It could be a grand coalition together with the Social Democrats, but this heavily depends on if and how many of the three smaller parties will enter the Bundestag. And what the current polls also suggest is that we will have a shift to the right, and from this shift to the right, the AfD will benefit. The party will, perhaps even double the result from the election 2021, where the AfD was around 10%. Now the party is expected to be around 20%. But it seems very unlikely for the AfD to enter in any government or in any coalition, because the other parties have made clear that they will not work with the AfD. But the party will most likely be then the strongest opposition party in the Bundestag after the upcoming election. So far from my side. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Roland. This was super insightful. There are some questions asked by the audience, and I would like to invite all of you to use the Q&A section if you would like to ask some questions. So I will start with a first question for you, Roland. It is about the budget. We have a question that goes, one of the biggest issues in the German election is insufficient budget. The budget issue becomes even more important when discussing defense spending. Currently, the German federal budget, excluding the portion allocated to social security and regional governments, is just around 13% of GDP. Do you see any opportunity to change this situation after the elections?
Okay,
it's a very technical one. Huh?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, and perhaps not something which a pollster like me can easily answer. I mean, the situation is that we have a so-called Schuldenbremse, a debt break in our constitution, where you would need a two-thirds majority to actually change it. So that is something which was heavily discussed and was also a big issue or a reason why the traffic light coalition failed in the end. They could not agree on how to spend the budget, and if they should actually increase the debt of the government or not. What we see in the current electoral campaign is that there is only one party left who is actually saying we should not increase the debt of the German state by all means, and that's the Liberals, the FDP. All the other parties more or less say, okay, it could be an option. Even the CDU, CSU, and the Chancellor candidate Friedrich Merz has said, yeah, we could talk about increasing the debt after the election, and so there could be potentially some room to solve these budgetary issues, which is also connected to how much do we spend on defense and security, how much do we support the Ukraine, and all of that. So it's connected to many topics. So yeah, there might be just no other solution than to change that after the election, and therefore I think there are certain opportunities, but it will not be an easy task to do that.
Thank you, Roland. I have another question, which is more regarding the future of the EU. So we have seen from your presentation that Merz was the very likely future chancellor, the leader of the CDU-CSU. What is his vision of the EU compared to Scholz, for instance?
So overall, in general, what we are seeing is that at least so far, the international politics and also EU politics have not played a major role in that election. It is around migration policy, also of course fueled by these attacks which we have seen in the last months in Germany. With several casualties and so on. This was of course bringing the migration and security, inner security topics to the agenda. And then the other thing is like economy and economic growth. And so far, the international relations haven't played a big role. It's perhaps also true that already under the traffic light coalition, so the government of Olaf Scholz, the whole EU topics were not so present than they have been in the era of Angela Merkel. So I think what the CDU-CSU is of course saying is we need to kind of develop the relationship to the EU. Of course, also this Dexit, like leaving the EU, is not an option for most of the parties. But I think it's also a question on how also Germany in that whole environment can benefit more in terms of developing the economy and also solving the migration puzzle or the migration challenge in that EU context, because this was discussed a lot. Why are so many migrants coming to Germany since we do not have an EU outside border, right? And is the Dublin rules, are they still working and so on? So this is the whole context where this has been discussed.
Thank you very much, Roland. So looking forward for the results of Sunday and to see what will be the outcome. Also a question now for you, Nico. Question from Marita. You showed that 49% of respondents in Germany place themselves in the center. Do we know how many are in the center right and how many are in the center left from the data of the Eurobarometer?
So among the 49%.
Yeah, I mean globally, I think in the repartition of the whole sample in Germany, do we have some figures a bit more detailed, maybe?
I don't have it right now, but the 50%. So we know very few on the far right, on the far left, if you split the left and the right. But for the center, yes, I will need to dig further to provide an answer to this.
Okay. So a question regarding the foreign interference, and maybe this one is for you, also, Roland. Which role does information or the interference by Elon Musk play in the electoral campaign and voting intentions? Do you have an idea, or if this can play a role on Sunday, or if Germans are generally, let's say, quite reluctant to such interference?
Yeah, that's a question we have been asked several times. We don't have, let's say, hard polling results on that, because it's difficult to actually divide that effect from other effects. I mean, as we have seen in the slides, the AfD numbers haven't changed significantly over the past weeks, and there have been both the whole interference of Elon Musk. JD Vance was talking at the Munich Security Council about working together with populist parties. We had sadly several attacks where refugees or foreigners actually injured or killed people in Germany, and all of that hasn't changed the numbers of the AfD dramatically. So it hasn't increased the numbers by 5%, 10%, or whatever, and therefore it's fair to assume that also the Elon Musk kind of support hasn't dramatically improved the AfD numbers. We are also measuring party potential, so how many people could even imagine to vote for a certain party, and there it looks like as if the AfD would be near its maximum. So there are a lot of people in Germany who say, I would never vote for AfD, and so there is a certain a limit where this party currently can get to, and all of these events and support from the external and so on, at least currently, is not changing that.
Okay. Thank you. There is another question regarding the difficulty or not to estimate accurately in the polls the results of populist parties. So, I mean, if we take the example of France, in the past, pollsters have struggled a lot to estimate currently accurately the Rassemblement National. Now the results have improved a lot these last years, sorry. But what is the situation in Germany? For instance, if we come back to 2021, were the polls accurate when it comes to estimate the AfD at that time, and therefore how confident are you for you 21% in your most recent poll and the result on Sunday? I don't want to put you too much on the spot, Roland.
Yeah. Also a well-known question and also a legitimate question. I mean, we are saying that, and you saw that sticker on that slide. It's not a prognosis; it's a projection on what would happen if there would be an election. We have seen difficulties in measuring support for the AfD in the past. We have kind of worked on that, improved methodologies. The advantage what we have in Germany compared to France or other countries is that we have a lot of elections. So the federal system is providing us the opportunity to actually do a lot of research on a lot of elections on a state level, and therefore we have already had really a lot of elections with a lot of data points on the AfD. We are doing exit polling for each of the elections, and then we actually have a very good view on what we measure, how is that transforming into the later election results, and how we can actually do that projection that is taking into account that there are certain things that we perhaps cannot measure properly in each and every survey. So we are pretty confident that we are in a statistical range how the political climate is at this point in time. And there have been also elections in Germany where the polls were different than the later election outcome. But for that one, I'm pretty optimistic because we have just not seen that much movement over the course of the past weeks. All the good polling institutes are measuring in the same direction, so it should be pretty accurate.
Thank you very much. Another question. So there are quite a few questions on the Q&A section, which is very good. And maybe this one is for you, Nico. So the EP has just released a snapshot from the Flash Eurobarometer Youth Survey. And in this survey, migration barely plays a role. Only 19% of young people think that the EU should prioritize migration and asylum in the next 5 years. And it looks slightly different from what we have in this German election debate right now. So it's also, I mean, we have discussed this when preparing this webinar with Roland, the fact that there is this kind of contradiction with the main priorities of the young and the fact that they are also quite supportive of the AfD. So what's your view on this?
So first, as we have seen, Germany is a particular country for migration in the EU. So I mean, this is the country where it's probably the highest score. In the post-election survey, it was the only country where migration was the first issue for the voters to vote. So it's a more silent issue in Germany than in other countries. It's a silent issue in other countries, but in Germany it's very much. But when you look at the breakdown for young people, it's less of an issue than for all the parts in Germany, at least in the standard Eurobarometer.
So on this.
So on this, young people in Germany less likely to mention migration as a concern, a national concern, than the rest of the German population. So I'm not surprised about these results. I think they are concordant with what we have here and in our research, bearing in mind that in Germany the problem is more silent than in other countries in Europe.
And Roland, this focus on migration in Germany, do you think it's very much related to the different terrorist attacks that occur recently, or is it a long-standing trend where migration has been high for a very long time?
Yeah, it's coming in waves, so to say. We had that topic on top of the agenda around 2015, 2016, during the Merkel administration, where we had that refugee crisis and all the decisions of the German government in that sense, and then it kind of disappeared a bit. And in that phase, the 2021 elections took place. There we had different topics, as you showed before, like climate change and social topics and all of that. And during the last years, also connected to the war in Ukraine, because we also have a lot of refugees from Ukraine, and then still a lot of refugees from other countries. That topic came up again. It is, of course, then a correlation with the AfD. Whenever this topic is discussed heavily, the AfD is getting stronger, and vice versa. The AfD is, of course, heavily pushing that topic. So it's a symbiosis in a certain way, and then still. Economy was the most important topic until end of last year, but when the attack on that Christmas market in Magdeburg happened, that kind of changed a bit, and then the further two attacks now in this year. So I would say it's now perhaps not a fully dominating topic, but it's at least equal with economic development. And this is how in which environment this campaign currently takes place.
Thank you very much, Roland. I'm conscious of time, and we are at the end of or maybe Nico, you wanted to...
No, I wanted to answer about the question about the people in the center. So I've checked, and the people who say they're in the center, they are mostly on the center left and center right. So it's around 16% say on center right, and the rest 34% on the center left, saying 5. But I think the main finding is that and that Roland can confirm that, is that most people in Germany think of themselves being in the center of this political spectrum. And that's also what we see with the different coalitions who can, SPD and CDU can work together. And I think also this diminish about the fear of having AfD as a member of the government.
Thank you very much, Nico.
Even just a last remark, even many voters of the AfD perceive themselves of being in the center. That might be a little bit a part of the explanation.
Okay, that's interesting. Again, thanks a lot to the two of you. I hope to the audience you found the content of this webinar interesting. And now Roland will look at the results on Sunday to see how accurate the polls were, bearing in mind that it's only it's not a prognosis, only the situation as we speak. And looking forward to meet you again for other webinars in the future. Thanks very much, and have a nice rest of the week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.